Good morning. I'm Reverend Michelle Scott Huffman. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the minister here at First UU. I wanted to share a little bit of a conversation that we've been having this week around the choir piece that you're about to hear. It's beautiful and we're excited about it. And some conversation has come up around the use of the piece and cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. And one of the things that we're aware of is that often these conversations come up in closed spaces, a Sunday service meeting or a religious education meeting, and the congregation doesn't get to be a part of the full conversation. And so as we introduce this piece today, we wanted to invite you into the conversation a little bit as we lean into being a people of our principles, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, and respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we all are a part. We recognize that sometimes we come up to points of tension and conflict. And so I wanted to share this conversation with you this morning, and I'll turn it over to John to share a little bit about the piece that we're going to hear.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm John Prescott, and I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the choir director. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about why this piece was chosen in this particular time. On December 6th, we learned that the choir was going to need to become a virtual choir for the next few months, and we didn't know how long. And so we looked for a piece that perhaps the choir had done before that could be easily recorded in little segments virtually and then put together in a video presentation for use in a service. And so we hit on Kaki Lambe, which is an arrangement done in 2005 by a composer arranger named Brian Tate. And in the preface and the program notes to his arrangement, he writes that Kaki Lambe was a creature in West African tradition who came from the forest to bring healing to the community. And that appears in the video presentation that you're going to see. But it turns out that there's a lot more, and I think AJ is going to talk about that a little later. But I wanted to mention that the healing part was the part that really appealed to me and to us in the choir because of what our whole community was going through, but also what we knew our choir was going to have to go through in being isolated for any number of weeks. And in my view, church music, creating music for churches and groups in churches is at least as important about the process than it is about the product. So that the process of getting together and creating music and putting it together as a group is at least as important in terms of the healing and the wellness of the people involved than it is about a presentation. And it's certainly not intended then for entertainment purposes, but instead for wellness purposes of the people who are making the music. And so that was the focus that we took as we proceeded with this project.
Thank you, John. So Michelle mentioned cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. And I have no experience dealing with this with music because that's not my lane, nor do I know much about music, honestly. But I know that in the religious educator forums, in UU spaces and virtual UU spaces, there's been a lot of conversation over the last few years that I've been involved about the ways that Unitarian Universalists balance this search for truth and meaning and respect for and drawing from world religions and making sure that we're not appropriating and kind of Frankenstein monstering other people's religious traditions, right? So I, unfortunately, on Thursday night, while listening to this at the rehearsal, I Googled Kaki Lambe and started reading about it. And I wish that I had done that about 5 weeks ago when John was mentioning in conversations that Kaki Lambe was going to be performed, because then we could have drawn this in more clearly. But so Kaki Lambe is part of Baga people's tradition. There's a little bit of like conflict over where it actually comes from, but the earliest references I can find are back in mostly in the 1960s. And by the time that you're talking about in the 60s, it's already an essentially eradicated religion or religious ritual. And Kaki Lambe was in a holy forest. Kaki Lambe, who's like this kind of big wooden statue with raffia hanging down, would come out of the forest as part of this ritual song. So this song is Kaki Lambe coming out of the forest. And then all of the elders would ask Kaki Lambe for the things that John was talking about, for healing and for fertility in the coming years. And this ritual was done every 7 years. So these are the photos that exist from the reenactments from the 60s. But these are the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the people who were actually participating in the Kaki Lambe rituals. These are short totems, a couple of people high. The drawings that come from before that describe a sculpture statue that is up to 10 meters high and has the head of a bird. And Kaki Lambe is the kind of highest god in these. And I wanted to read just a little bit. This is from the 1960s, and it says, "In these days, Kaki Lambe, the terrible god of the Bagas, is no more than a memory which used to make the ancient people tremble. But during centuries, he ruled the lives of the Bagatai. He was the master of the waters, of the rain, of the winds, and of the fire. Every 7 years, announced by thunder and the cries of the priests of the great fetish, appeared to the terrified men, and through the voice of the prophet of the country he spoke to the assembled villages. First, he showed his anger against those whose actions had been contrary to ethics and virtue. The people prostrated themselves and, repenting, asked him to grant them grace and swore to him allegiance. Then Kaki Lambe, reassured to see that he remained master of the children of the Bagas country as he had been over the fathers before them, roared with joy and predicted 7 years of happiness and prosperity, and then, accompanied by songs of joy and gratitude, he disappeared for 7 more years. Therefore, during 7 years, the earth will be prosperous and the women fertile. Kaki Lambe has spoken." There was a second part of the ritual that involved the goddess of fertility, Nimba of the huge breasts, appearing. The images that we have, the first images of Kaki Lambe that we have, are from Catholic missionaries who drew or sketched Kaki Lambe somewhere just before the 1930s, and those are now stored at the Vatican. So the Kaki Lambe song that we're going to hear today is actually this ancient ritual that was suppressed as part of both, it sounds like, French colonialism, and later or parallel a series of jihads funding. It's very complicated stuff that these totems, these ritual pieces were scattered. And so we find ourselves, thinking about appropriation and lanes and the ways that we found these pieces. And also, it's a really pretty song, and I greatly appreciate John doing all the work of putting it together and all the people who sang it.
And the choir, there was such an inclusion in the choir. So many people participated in this that it really was a group effort. I might add that having taught world music courses before, I've become familiar with codes of ethics by ethnomusicologists who collect these songs and materials from their sources. And that I think we have to collectively have the faith that they have operated on these codes of ethics by collecting music with disclosure to the people they've collected it from, saying, yes, we are going to use your material for educational purposes or for publication in a textbook. We rely on that knowledge and that code to help us in situations. We have no way of knowing whether, and neither does probably Mr. Tate, who arranged this, whether that was really followed in this case or not. We simply have to operate on faith.
And I think that those ethics apply in academic settings, but we all three find ourselves dealing with this other situation, which is that we are a religious community figuring out how to find the walk and balance of ethics and morality and truth and meaning in the universe. And what we're doing here on Sunday morning is different than being in a classroom. It is, but it's tricky how it's different. And so we find ourselves with these other issues here as a religious community that talks about how we engage with people's ritual that we're not here to share it with us directly.
And so this morning, we are going to hear the beautiful version of Kaki Lambe that was recorded by our choir. And I want to invite you just to think about our connectedness to people in all places and all times, but also as a people primarily of a dominant culture, the ways that we have been the colonizers, the ways that we have been the reason that other people's religious practices have been eradicated, and to take very seriously the tension that we feel in this moment, and to make sure that when we do these things, that we are really honoring the inherent worth and dignity of those peoples and of the traditions that we are appreciating in this moment. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.